The smell of burnt coffee and stale regret clung to the kitchen like a second skin. Nora Hart stood at the counter, her fingers wrapped around a chipped mug that had once been part of a matching set. Back when matching sets meant something, back when she believed in the kind of family that gathered for Sunday brunch and passed heirloom recipes from mother to daughter. That was before her mother-in-law, Eleanor Vance, had looked at Nora's daughter, Mia, across a mahogany dining table and said, with the surgical precision of a woman who had never been denied anything in her life, "She's useless. She'll never amount to anything. I'm cutting her from the inheritance." Nora had heard the words 3 years ago, but they still rang in her ears like a gunshot. The memory was visceral, the clink of silverware against bone china, the way Eleanor's pearl necklace caught the chandelier light, the smug little smile that tugged at the corners of her mouth as she delivered the verdict. Mia had been 12 then, too young to fully understand the weight of her grandmother's cruelty, but old enough to feel the sting of rejection. She had excused herself from the table with a trembling voice and locked herself in her room for 3 days. Nora had sat outside that door, her back against the wall, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Today, the kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Nora's hands were steady as she lifted the mug to her lips, but her mind was a hurricane. 3 years of silent rfa. 3 years of watching Eleanor shower her other grandchildren with expensive gifts, exclusive vacations, and the kind of fawning attention that made Mia's eyes go glassy with hurt. 3 years of Nora biting her tongue, playing the dutiful daughter-in-law, pretending that she didn't notice the way Eleanor's gaze slid past Mia, like she was a piece of furniture. She had tolerated it for her husband, Richard Rode. She had tolerated it for the sake of family unity, for the illusion of peace. But Richard Rode was gone now, not dead, just absent, buried in his work and his mother's shadow, a man who had never quite learned to stand upright without Eleanor's approval propping him up. And Nora was tired, bone-tired, soul-tired, tired of being the woman who smiled through the insults and swallowed the outrage like medicine. Her phone buzzed on the counter, shattering the silence. She glanced at the screen. An unknown number. Normally, she would have let it go to voicemail, but something about the persistent vibration made her pick it up. Mrs. Hart. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, with a hint of RMTH that felt almost jarring. "My name is Diana Reyes. I'm an attorney with Reyes and Associates. I've been retained to represent you in a matter regarding the Vance family estate." Nora's blood went cold. "I don't understand. I haven't retained anyone." "Your late mother-in-law's estate," the attorney began. "Eleanor is alive," Nora cut in, her voice sharper than she intended. "Very much alive. She made that abundantly clear at Christmas." There was a pause on the other end, the kind of weighted silence that precedes bad news. "Mrs. Hart, I'm so sorry to be the one to tell you this. Eleanor Vance passed away 2 days ago.
Cardiac arrest."
I assumed the family had contacted you." Nora's hand tightened around the mug until her knuckles went white. She hadn't heard a word. Richard Rode hadn't mentioned anything. Her phone had been suspiciously quiet, not a single condolence call from the vast Vance network of cousins, aunts, and sycophantic family friends. She had been excluded. Again. Deliberately. "I haven't been informed," she said, her voice hollow. "My husband hasn't said a word." Diana Reyes sighed softly, a sound of professional sympathy. "I'm not surprised, Mrs. Hart. There's been a great deal of maneuvering in the last 48 hours. Richard Rode and his sister, Camille, have already met with the estate executors. There's a will reading scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. I strongly advise you to attend. And I strongly advise you to bring your daughter."
Mia Nora S.A. reticized.
Why would Mia need to be there? Eleanor made her intentions crystal clear. She cut Mia out. She said, "I know what she said." The attorney's voice was gentle but firm. "I have the full documentation from the original trust agreement, but I also have some additional documents that have come to light. Documents that your mother-in-law attempted to destroy before her death." The kitchen spun around Nora. She set the mug down, gripping the edge of the counter for balance. What kind of documents? Asset documents, Diana said. Unexpected asset documents. I can't go into detail over the phone, but I can tell you this. Eleanor Vance may have been a master of public perception, but she was far less skilled at covering her private tracks. Your daughter's inheritance is not what it appears to be. In fact, it's much richer, and it was never legally hers to cut. Nora's breath caught. What do you mean? I mean that the trust Eleanor set up for her grandchildren was funded with assets that didn't belong to her. Assets that belonged to your grandmother, Mrs. Hart, assets that were fraudulently transferred decades ago. I have the proof. I have the signatures, the forged documents, the bank records. And I have a very motivated legal team ready to pursue this. Nora felt a strange, electric hum coursing through her veins. It wasn't joy, not yet.
It was too raw for that.
But it was something close to hope. Something that tasted like vindication. Tomorrow, she said, her voice steadying.
10 o'clock.
We'll be there. One more thing, Diana added. Richa Road and Camille don't know about these documents. They don't know I'm representing you. I'd advise you to keep it that way until the reading. You'll want the element of surprise. Nora hung up and stood in the silent kitchen, her reflection ring back at her from the darkened window. She looked tired, she thought. Worn down. A woman who had spent the last 3 years absorbing blows and pretending they didn't leave bruises. But there was something else in her reflection now. A glint of steel. A flicker of the woman she used to be, before Eleanor Vance had tried to grind her into dust. She went upstairs to Mia's room. Her daughter was 17 now, a quiet, observant girl with her mother's dark eyes and her father's gua-eyed smile. Mia was curled up on her bed with a book, a pair of headphones resting around her neck. She looked up as Nora entered, and her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. Mom, you look like you've seen a ghost. Nora sat on the edge of the bed, taking her daughter's hand. Your grandmother is dead, sweetheart. Mia's face went blank. Not sad, not shocked, just empty. The way a person looks when they've already grieved someone who is still breathing. Oh, she said softly. I guess I should feel something, right? But I don't. I don't feel anything. That's okay, Nora said, squeezing her hand. You don't owe her your grief. You don't owe her anything. But I need you to listen to me. There's a will reading tomorrow and we have to go. Something has changed. Something that might finally give us a chance to fight back.
Mia esse brau farod.
Fight back against what Grandma's dead. The inheritance is gone. She made sure of that. She made sure of a lot of things, Nora said, her voice hardening. But she wasn't as careful as she thought she was. There are documents, Mia. Documents that prove she stole from our family. Stole from you. And tomorrow, we're going to show everyone the truth. Mia's eyes widened. What kind of documents? I don't know all the details yet. Nora leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But I know they're powerful. Powerful enough to unravel everything your grandmother built. And that's exactly what we're going to do. For the first time in 3 years, Mia smiled. It was a small, tentative smile, like a flower pushing through cracked pavement. But it was real. And it was enough. The next morning, Nora dressed with care. Not in the muted, apologetic colors she had worn to every Vance family event, but in a RP navy blazer and tailored trousers that made her feel remarried. Mia wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, her face pale but composed. They drove to the attorney's office in silence. The tension in the CA thick enough to choke on. The conference room was already full when they arrived. Richa Road was seated at the long table, his face flushed with irritation. His sister, Camille, sat beside him, her diamond-studded fingers drumming impatiently on the polished wood. They both looked up as Nora and Mia entered, and their expressions curdled with concealed hostility. Nora, Richa Road said, his voice clipped. I didn't expect you to come. This is a family matter. I am family, Nora said coldly, pulling out a chair and gesturing for Mia to sit. Or have you forgotten that too? Camille snorted. You're not a Vance. You married into this family, and you never quite understood what that meant. Eleanor made her wishes clear. Mia gets nothing. You get nothing. There's no point in dragging this out. Before Nora could respond, the door opened and Diana Reyes walked in. She was a striking woman in her 40s, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that missed nothing. She carried a thick file folder and a tablet, and she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew she held all the cards. Good morning, everyone, she said, her voice carrying a calm authority that silenced the room. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Diana Reyes, the attorney representing Mrs. Nora Hart and her daughter, Mia. I've been asked to oversee the distribution of Eleanor Vance's estate, as per the revised will that was filed just last week. Rich A.R.D. shot to his feet. Revised will? What revised will? My mother's will was finalized 3 years ago. She made no changes. Actually, Diana said, sliding a document across the table, she did. A week before her death, she signed a codicil that reinstates Mia Vance as a prima beneficiary of the Vance Family Trust. The room erupted. Camille's shriek was almost theatrical, a sound of genuine fury. Richa Ardi's face went from red to purple, his hands clenching into fists. But Nora was watching Diana, waiting for the other shoe to drop. This is impossible, Richa Rhodes sputtered. My mother hated Mia, she said. I know what she said. Diana's voice was ice. I also know what she did, which is why I have another set of documents to present. She opened the file folder and spread a series of papers across the table. These are re-asset documents from the original trust established by Nora's grandmother, Eleanor's mother-in-law, M.A.R.J. Irette Vance. According to these records, the bulk of the Vance fortune was built on assets that belonged to M.A.R.J. Irette, assets that were legally designated to pass to Nora's mother, and then to Nora, and then to Mia. Camille snatched up one of the papers, scanning it with wild eyes. This is a forgery. M.A.R.J. Irette Vance was a nobody. She had nothing. M.A.R.J. Irette Vance, Diana said calmly, was the sole heir of the H.A. Irette shipping fortune. She married into the Vance family and brought substantial wealth with her. Her will explicitly stated that her assets were to remain separate from the Vance Family Trust and passed directly to her female descendants. Eleanor Vance forged M.A.R.J. Irette's signature on documents that transferred those assets into the Vance Trust. She did it over 40 years ago, and she covered her tracks meticulously. Nora felt the air leave her lungs. The H.A. Irette shipping fortune. Her grandmother had been a H.A. Irette. The name was legendary, a dynasty of industrialists and philanthropists. Nora's mother had never spoken of it. She had lived modestly, died quietly, and taken her secrets to the grave. You're lying, Richa Rhodes said, but his voice had lost its conviction. He was pale now, his bravado crumbling. I'm not lying, Diana said. I have forensic accountants, handwriting experts, and a paper trail that stretches back 5 decades. The forgery is provable. The fraud is provable. And the statute of limitations has not yet run out, because Eleanor continued to conceal these assets until her death. Mia was staring at the documents, her face unreadable. Nora reached under the table and squeezed her hand. So what does this mean? Nora asked, her voice steadied. It means, Diana said, that the Vance Trust is illegitimate. The assets that Eleanor believed she controlled are in fact, yours. And Mia's. By right of inheritance. I've already filed a motion to freeze the Vance accounts and begin the process of asset recovery. Richa Rhodes and Camille will have to account for every dollar they've spent that didn't belong to them. Camille let out a strangled sound, something between a sob and a growl. This is insane. You can't do this. We'll fight it. We'll destroy you. I'm counting on it, Nora said, her voice calm and cold. Because I have a team of lawyers, a mountain of evidence, and a daughter who has been denied her birthright for 17 years. You and your mother thought you could erase us. But you made one fatal mistake. You underestimated the quiet ones. She rose from her seat, pulling Mia with her. Come on, sweet ART. We have a long road ahead of us. But for the first time in a long time, the road is heading in the right direction. As they walked out of the conference room, Mia leaned into her mother's side. "Mom," she whispered, "what just happened?" "Justice," Nora said, her voice fierce with conviction. "That's what just happened. And we're just getting STA route." They left the building into the cold morning air, and for the first time in years, Nora felt the sun on her face like a blessing. The battle was far from over. Richa Road and Camille were wealthy, desperate, and ruthless. They would retaliate, spreading lies, filing countersuits, and doing everything in their power to crush her. But Nora had something they didn't. The truth. And the truth, she had finally Leah Rened, was a weapon that never dulled. She turned to Mia, her daughter's face lifted to the pale winter sky, and allowed herself a small, hard smile. Tomorrow they would face the storm. But today, they had won the first battle. And that was more than Eleanor Vance had ever given them in her entire life. Chapter 2. The first crack in the the drive home from the attorney's office was a blur of neon streetlights and fractured thoughts. Nora gripped the steering wheel with whitened knuckles, her mind still reeling from the avalanche of revelations. Beside her, Mia sat in silence, her face pressed against the cold glass of the passenger window, watching the city slide by in streaks of gray and gold. The weight of the morning pressed down on them both, but it was not a weight of despair. It was the weight of possibility, heavy and unfamiliar, like a key to a door they had long since stopped trying to open. Nora pulled the car into the driveway of their modest two-story house, a home she had purchased with her own savings after Richa Road had moved out 18 months ago. It was smaller than the Vance estate, shabbier, without the manicured dens and marbly fountains. But it was hers. Every creaking floorboard, every drafty window, every patch of peeling paint in the kitchen, it was all hers. And for the first time in her marriage, that felt like a victory rather than a compromise. She killed the engine and sat in the sudden silence, her hands still trembling on the wheel. Mia unbuckled her seatbelt but made no move to get out. "Mom," she said quietly, "is any of this real, or am I going to wake up tomorrow and find out it was all some kind of dream?" Nora turned to look at her daughter. The girl's face was pale, her eyes shadowed with the exhaustion of a teenager who had been forced to grow up too fast. Nora reached over and tucked a strand of dark hair behind Mia's ear, a gesture so familiar and maternal that it almost made her own eyes sting. "It's real," she said. "I promise you it's real. Your grandmother spent 40 years stealing from us, lying to us, making us feel small and worthless so she could keep what was never hers. But she's gone now, and her lies are re-crumbling." Mia's jaw tightened. What if Richa Road and Camille find a way to stop us? They have money. They have connections. They've gotten away with everything for years. They've gotten away with it because no one challenged them, Nora said, her voice hardening. "But that ends now. I spent too long being silent, Mia. Too long smiling at people who were stabbing me in the back. I thought if I was patient enough, gracious enough, forgiving enough, they would eventually see my value. They would eventually accept me. But that's not how predators work. They don't see kindness as strength. They see it as weakness. And they exploit it until there's nothing left." Mia was watching her with an expression that was both surprised and hopeful. "You've never talked like this before. You've always told me to rise above it, to be the bigger person." "Because I was wrong," Nora admitted, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "Rising above it doesn't work when the other person is standing on your neck. Sometimes you have to push back. Sometimes you have to fight dirty. And sometimes you have to be willing to burn everything down to save the people you love." She reached into her purse and pulled out the business card Diana Reyes had given her. The card was sleek, minimalist, embossed with a phone number and an email address. Diana had promised to send over a digital copy of the asset documents by the end of the day, along with a list of next steps. But there was something else, a nagging thought that had been circling Nora's mind since the meeting. "Wait here," she said, unbuckling her seatbelt. "I need to check something." She hurried into the house, leaving Mia in the CAR, and went straight to her home office. It was a small, cluttered room at the back of the house, filled with old filing cabinets and boxes of papers she had never had the time or energy to organize. But there was one box she remembered distinctly, a wooden keepsake box her mother had given her before she died. It was filled with letters, photographs, and a few tattered legal documents that Nora had never fully examined. She pulled the box from the back of a closet and carried it to her desk, her heart hammering. The dust made her sneeze as she lifted the lid, revealing a jumble of memorabilia. She sifted through old birthday cards, faded photographs of her mother as a young woman, and a small leather journal with yellowed pages. And then she found it, a manila envelope, UNMA sealed with yellowing tape. She tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a copy of her grandmother Margaret's will, along with a handwritten letter that had never been sent. Nora unfolded the letter carefully, her eyes scanning the elegant, looping script. My dear rest Eleanor, I write this in confidence, knowing that you will never read it. But I must put these words on paper, if only to free them from my heart. I have watched you rry my son, Bea are my grandchildren, and take your place as the matriarch of this family. But I have also watched you slowly, methodically, erase my daughter from our lives. You have convinced everyone, including my own son, that our family's wealth came from the Vances. But you know the truth. You know that I brought the fortune into this marriage. You know that my parents' shipping empire built the foundation of everything we have. And you know that I intended for my granddaughter, Nora's mother, to inherit it all. Asterisk. I have seen you forge documents. I have seen you manipulate legal agreements. I have kept silent because I wanted peace, because I believed you would eventually do the right thing. But I was wrong. And now I am old and my time is short, and I cannot are to see my legacy stolen from the ones who deserve it. Asterisk, I am leaving this letter with my solicitor, to be opened after my death. If you have changed your ways, he will never need to use it. But if you have continued your campaign of theft and manipulation, I have given him the authority to expose everything. Asterisk. I pray you prove me wrong. Asterisk with love and regret. Asterisk Margaret Well Vance. Asterisk Nora read the letter twice, her hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. Her grandmother had known. She had known about Eleanor's schemes, and she had tried to protect her descendants. But something had gone wrong. The letter had never been delivered to the solicitor. It had been hidden away, buried in a box of personal effects, never to see the light of day. Until now, Nora sat back in her chair, her mind spinning. This letter was more than just a piece of paper. It was a weapon. It was proof that Eleanor had been committing fraud for decades, proof that Margaret had been wary of it, and proof that the Vance family's fortune was built on stolen ground. She would need to share this with Diana immediately. But as she reached for her phone, another thought stopped her cold. The letter was dated 6 months before Margaret's death. 6 months before Eleanor had become the sole executor of the Vance estate. What if Eleanor had intercepted the original letter to the solicitor? What if she had destroyed the evidence and then systematically erased every trace of Margaret's wishes? If that was true, then the asset documents Diana had uncovered might only be the tip of the iceberg. There could be more: bank accounts, properties, investments, all of it hidden in plain sight, all of it waiting to be reclaimed. Nora ruefully folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and locked it in her desk drawer. Then she called Diana, but the attorney answered on the second ring. Mrs. Hart, I was just about to call you. I've had my team START digging into the Hartwell shipping fortune, and we've uncovered something significant. Margaret Vance's estate was far larger than we initially estimated. There are offshore accounts, trust funds in the Cayman Islands, and a portfolio of real estate holdings that Eleanor never disclosed. We're talking about millions, Mrs. Hart, possibly tens of millions. Nora's breath caught. I found something too. A letter from my grandmother to Eleanor. She knew about the fraud. She tried to stop it. The letter was never delivered. Eleanor must have intercepted it. There was a pause on the other end. When Diana spoke again, her voice was sharp with urgency. Mrs. Hart, that letter is critical evidence. We need to file it with the court immediately. Do you have it in your possession? Yes, Nora said. It's locked in my desk. I'll bring it to you tomorrow morning. Good. And Mrs. Hart, I need you to be very careful. Eleanor might be dead, but Richa Road and Camille A. still very much alive. They're going to fight this tooth and nail. They'll try to discredit you, intimidate you, and drag you through the mud. They'll do whatever it takes to keep the money. Let them try, Nora said, her voice cold. I've been through worse. She hung up and stood in the dim light of her office, the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. She should have felt triumphant. She had evidence, she had allies, and she had the momentum of justice on her side. But instead, she felt a strange, hollow ache, the grief of a woman who had spent her entire adult life being gaslit into believing she was less than she was. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Mia standing in the doorway. The girl's face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. Mom, I just got a text from Dad. He says if we don't drop the claim, he's going to take me to court. He says he'll prove you're an unfit mother. Nora felt a flash of white-hot anger. Of course Richa Road would go there. He had no real argument, no legal standing, so he would resort to the oldest weapon in the abuser's arsenal, the threat to take the child. It was the one thing that could still make Nora's blood run cold. He's bluffing, Nora said, though her heart was pounding. He has no grounds. He left us, Mia. He rely visits. He doesn't pay child support consistently. The courts aren't going to give him custody just because he's angry. But what if he does it anyway? Mia's voice was small, trembling. What if he lies and people believe him? Nora crossed the room and took her daughter's face in her hands. Listen to me. I have been a mother for 17 years. I have been present for every school play, every doctor's appointment, every night every he-right break. Your father has been absent for most of them. No judge is going to look at that and decide I'm the unfit one. But even if he tries, even if he throws everything he has at us, we are going to fight. Together.
Do you understand?
Mia nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm SCA red. I know, Nora said, pulling her into a tight embrace. I'm SCA red too. But we're not going to let that stop us. Your grandmother stole your birthright. She spent decades building a legacy of lies. And now, we're going to tear it down brick by brick. They stood in the quiet of the office, holding each other, as the weight of the coming battle settled over them like a storm cloud. Outside, the rain began to fall, pattering against the windows in a soft, relentless rhythm. Nora held her daughter tighter and made a silent vow. She would not lose this war. She would not let Richa Road, Camille, or any of Eleanor's ghosts take anything else from her.
Her phone buzzed again.
This time, it was a text from an unknown number. She opened it with a flicker of apprehension. Asterisk, you think you've won. You haven't. I have more than you know. Asterisk, asterisk. Camille, asterisk. Nora, STA read at the screen, her jaw tight. Camille had always been a snake, but she had never been subtle. This was a threat, plain and simple. A warning that the battle was far from over. She typed back a single word. Bring it. Then she turned off her phone and focused on the woman who mattered most. Chapter 3. The pawn moves first. Nora slept poorly that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the window, every distant bark of a dog sent her heart racing. She lay in the dark, STA ring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events like a film reel that refused to stop spinning. The letter from Margaret. The attorney's revelation about offshore accounts. Camille's threatening text. And Richa Artie's promise to drag her through custody court, using their daughter as a gaining chip in a war she had never wanted to fight. By dawn, she had made a decision. She would not wait for Richa Road to strike first. She would go on the offensive. Not with aggression, not with fury, but with precision. She would gather every piece of evidence, every scrap of documentation, every witness who had ever seen the cracks in Eleanor's polished facade. And she would build a case so airtight that the Van Cess would have no choice but to crumble. She dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, her movements efficient and deliberate. Mia was still asleep, her face peaceful against the pillow, and Nora paused for a moment in the doorway of her daughter's room, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. The sight steeled her resolve. Whatever came next, she would not let Mia suffer the consequences of her father's greed. She drove to Diana Reyes's office before the city had fully woken, the streets still damp with morning dew. The attorney was already there, her office lights blazing, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand. She looked up as Nora entered, and her sharp eyes immediately took in the tension in Nora's shoulders. "You've been thinking," Diana said. "It wasn't a question. I've been planning," Nora corrected, settling into the chair across from the desk. "I want to file a motion to freeze all of Richa Road and Camille's personal accounts. Not just the trust. Everything. Their personal checking accounts, their investment portfolios, their properties. I want them to know that we're not just coming for the inheritance. We're coming for everything they've built on stolen ground." Diana arched an eyebrow, a flicker of approval crossing her face. "That's aggressive. And it's going to make them very, very angry. They're already angry. They're already threatening me. I'd rather they be angry and broke than angry and powerful." Nora leaned four-way road. "Can you do it? I can file the motion," Diana said slowly. "But I need to RNU. Richa Road and Camille will fight it. They'll argue that you're trying to destroy their livelihoods out of spite. The judge will need to see evidence that the accounts contain fraudulently acquired assets. Do you have that evidence?" Nora reached into her bag and pulled out the manila envelope containing Marga Rhett's letter. "I have this. And I have a list of properties that my grandmother owned before her marriage to Eleanor's son. I found records in my mother's personal files. She kept everything: deeds, titles, tax records. I didn't understand what I was looking at when I inherited her things. But I do now." Diana took the envelope and read the letter in silence, her expression shifting from professional detachment to something sharper, hungrier. When she looked up, her eyes were gleaming. "This is gold. This is absolute, unassailable gold. With this, we can argue that Eleanor's entire control over the Vance estate was based on fraud. That means every asset she transferred, every trust she managed, every gift she gave to Richa Road and Camille, it all becomes fair game. How long will the motion take? I can have it filed by this afternoon." Diana set the letter down carefully, as if it were made of spun glass. "But there's something else we need to discuss. You mentioned your grandmother's records. I'm going to need to see all of them. Every deed, every tax return, every scrap of paper that mentions the H.A. Rtwell shipping fortune. If we're going to build a complete picture of the fraud, we need to start at the very beginning." Nora nodded, already making a mental list of the boxes in her home office. There were dozens of them, accumulated over years of moving and sorting, and avoiding the painful task of confronting her mother's legacy. But she wasn't avoiding it anymore. She was embracing it. The rest of the morning was a blur of phone calls, emails, and frantic document scanning. Nora returned home to find Mia awake and anxious, her laptop open to the news coverage of the Vance estate scandal. The headline read, "Vance family heiress faces fraud allegations." The article was sparse on details, citing anonymous sources close to the case, but the tone was salacious, clear leaning tower RD sympathy for the Vances. "Mom, people saying horrible things about you in the comments," Mia said, her voice trembling. "They're saying you're a gold digger, that you married Dad for his money, and now you're trying to steal from his family." Nora set down her bag and walked over to the couch, sitting beside her daughter. "Mia, look at me." She waited until Mia's tear-filled eyes met hers. "I married your father because I loved him. I stayed with him because I believed in the institution of marriage. I tolerated his mother's abuse because I wanted to keep our family together. And I never, ever wanted a single dollar of Vance money. What I want now is justice. Not revenge. Justice." Does it feel different, Mia asked, her voice small. Justice and revenge, I mean. Nora considered the question, turning it over in her mind like a stone. Revenge is about hurting someone because they hurt you. Justice is about making things right. It's about restoring balance. When I take back what Eleanor stole, I'm not doing it to destroy Richa Road and Camille. I'm doing it to give you the future you deserve. That's the difference. Mia nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. I want to help, she said. I know I'm not a lawyer and I don't know anything about trusts or fraud, but I can keep track of things. I can RCH. I can be your eyes and EARS. Nora felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost brought TRS to her eyes. You already sweet ART. You've always been my eyes and EARS. And I'm going to need you more than ever in the coming weeks. That afternoon, Nora received an unexpected visitor. She was in the kitchen, making tea, when a sleek black sedan pulled into her driveway. She watched through the window as a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive overcoat emerged from the driver's seat. He was handsome in a weathered, distinguished way, with a kind of commanding presence that suggested he was used to being listened to. Nora opened the door before he could knock. Can I help you? The man smiled, a practiced gesture that didn't quite reach his eyes.
MRSHRT.
My name is Gregory Vance. I'm Richa RD's uncle, Eleanor's brother-in-law. I believe we have something to discuss.
Nora HRT kvikand.
She knew Gregory only by reputation, a retired corporate lawyer who had always maintained a CA-reful distance from the family's internal dramas. He had never participated in Eleanor's cruelty, but he had never intervened on Nora's behalf either. His sudden appearance was deeply suspicious. Come in, she said, stepping aside. Gregory entered the house with the air of a man who was accustomed to being invited into grander spaces. He looked around the modest living room with an expression that was difficult to read. Not contempt, exactly, but a kind of clinical assessment. I'll get straight to the point, he said, settling into an A-room chair without being offered a seat. I know about the letter. Marga Rhett wrote to me before she died, confessing her FIA-RS about Eleanor's schemes. She asked me to intervene, but I was a Coway Road. I chose to stay silent rather than provoke a war. That's a decision I've regretted every day for the past 40 years. Nora Sta read at him, her mind racing. You knew all this time. You knew what Eleanor was doing, and you said nothing. Marga Rhett's letter was never meant to be a weapon, Gregory said, his voice heavy with remorse. It was meant to be a warning. And I ignored it because I was young and ambitious and terrified of what Eleanor would do if I crossed her. She was a formidable woman, Mrs. HART. She destroyed everyone who stood in her way. I convinced myself that staying quiet was the only way to protect my own family. But you're here now, Nora said slowly. Why? Gregory leaned forward, his expression hardening. Because my nephew, Richa Road, made a mistake. A very serious mistake. He's been using the Vance family's offshore accounts to fund a number of questionable ventures that could land him in federal prison if the right authorities found out. And he's been doing it with Camille's knowledge and blessing. Nora's blood went cold. What kind of ventures? Money laundering, Gregory said bluntly. He's been funneling funds through a series of shell companies to finance a private real estate development project in the Caribbean. The project is illegal. It involves bribery, environmental violations, and the displacement of indigenous communities. If this comes to light, Richa Road will face criminal charges.
Camille, too.
Nora felt like the floor was tilting beneath her feet. She had known Richa Road was greedy, entitled, morally flexible. But she had never imagined he was capable of something this dark, this destructive. Why are you telling me this? She asked, her voice above a whispered. Because I want to make amends, Gregory said. And because I believe you're the only person who can stop him. Richa Road is out of control. He's been living in Eleanor's shadow his entire life, and now that she's gone, he's trying to prove he's worthy of her legacy. But he's going to destroy himself and everyone around him if someone doesn't intervene. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a USB drive, which he placed on the coffee table between them. This contains all the evidence you'll need. Bank statements, wire transfers, email correspondence. It's enough to put Richa Road and Camille away for a very long time. Use it as you see fit. Nora Sta read at the drive, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to laugh. The irony was staggering. Eleanor's legacy was crumbling faster than she could have ever imagined. Part of her wanted to weep, for her daughter, for her mariage, for all the years she had wasted on people who never deserved her loyalty. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. "I don't know if I trust you, Gregory, but I appreciate the gesture." "I don't expect your trust," Gregory said, rising from his chair. "I just hope that someday you'll understand that I'm not the enemy. I was just a man who was too afraid to do the right thing. I'm trying to change that now." He walked to the door and paused, his hand on the knob. "BCA refill. Mrs. Hart Richa Road is dangerous when cornered. And Camille is even worse. She has nothing left to lose." After he left, Nora sat in the silence of the living room, the USB drive glowing like a live grenade in the palm of her hand. She thought about what Gregory had said about the offshore accounts and the illegal development project and the federal prison. She thought about Richa Artie's text, his threat to take Mia away from her. She thought about Eleanor's legacy, built on lies and stolen from a family that had never even known it was fighting, as she made a decision. She would not use the USB drive to destroy Richa Road.
Not yet.
She would use it as leverage, a BA regaining Chip to force him to back down, to sign over his claims to the Vance estate, to leave Mia alone for good. But she also knew that leverage could backfire. If Richa Road was truly as desperate as Gregory claimed, he might lash out in unpredictable ways. She would need to be SMART. She would need to be CA refill. And she would need to protect Mia at all costs. She tucked the drive into her pocket and went upstairs to check on her daughter. Mia was at her desk, headphones on, scrolling through legal documents with an intensity that made Nora's heart. "Hey," Nora said softly, touching her shoulder. "How are you holding up?" Mia pulled off her headphones and turned to face her mother. "I found something," she said, her voice tinged with excitement and fear. "Our dad has a second phone. A burner. He uses it to communicate with someone named Jay. There are retexts about a meeting. Tomorrow night. At a Wari House NEA are the docks." Nora's blood ran cold. "A burner phone, how did you get access to that?" Mia's expression flickered with guilt. "I logged into his cloud account. I remembered his password from years ago and I just tried it. I know I shouldn't have, but I wanted to help. I wanted to find something that would protect us." Nora Sta read at her daughter, a swirl of pride and fear are rising in her chest. "Mia, this is dangerous. If Richa Road finds out you've been accessing his accounts, he won't," Mia said firmly. "And if he does, he'll have to explain why he's using a burner phone to meet someone named Jay at a Wari House. Mom, this could be connected to the money laundering Gregory was talking about. This could be our way to end this." Nora took a deep breath, her mind racing. Her daughter was right. This could be the break they needed, but it could also be a trap. And the thought of Mia getting caught in the crossfire was unbearable. "We're not going to that Wari House," Nora said, her voice brooking no argument. "But we're going to tell Diana. And we're going to let her decide how to use this information. We're going to play this SMART, Mia. We're not going to rush in without a plan." Mia nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Okay. But, Mom, whatever happens tomorrow night, I'm not going to be afraid anymore. I'm done being afraid." Nora pulled her daughter into a hug, holding her tight. "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." But as she held her daughter, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something vast and dangerous. The pawns had STA route moving, and the game was far from over. Chapter 4. The WA house. The Wari House sat at the edge of the industrial district, a crumbling monolith of rusted steel and shattered windows that had once been a shipping depot. Now it was a Gravier RD for forgotten commerce, its cavernous interior filled with the skeletal remains of old machinery and the faint, acrid smell of oil and decay. Nora had driven there alone, against every instinct that screamed at her to stay home. She had left Mia with a trusted neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Albright who had known Nora since she was a girl and asked no questions when Nora showed up at her door with a bag of clothes and a whispered plea. "Keep her safe," Nora had said. "No matter what happens, don't let anyone take her." Mrs. Albright had nodded, her weathered face grim with understanding. "You come back for her, Nora." "You hear me," Nora had promised, even though she wasn't sure she could keep it. Now she sat at her car, a modest sedan that Richa Road had always mocked as beneath his station, parked in the shadow of a derelict grain silo 100 yards from the Wari house. The night was cold, the kind of bone-deep chill that seeped through layers of clothing and settled into the marrow. She had turned off the engine and the headlights, her breath fogging the windshield as she watched the building through a pair of binoculares RS she had borrowed from Mrs. Albright's husband, a man who had been a hunter in his youth and still kept his equipment in pristine condition. For 45 minutes, nothing happened. The Wari house remained dark and still, a hulking shape against the sta sky. Nora's hands were numb on the binoculares RS, her legs cramped from sitting in the same position for too long. She was about to call a night, to accept that Mia's intel had been a dead end, when a pair of headlights sliced through the darkness. A black SUV pulled into the Wari house loading bay, its engine rumbling like a predator's growl. The driver's door opened, and a figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the confident stride of a man who owned every room he entered. Even from a distance, Nora recognized the silhouette. It was Richa Road, her husband, the father of her child, the man she had once loved with a fervor that now seemed like a cruel joke. He was not alone. Another figure stepped out of the passenger side, shorter and slighter, wrapped in a long coat that billowed in the wind. It was Camille, her silver blonde hair catching the faint glow of the SUV's interior lights like a beacon. She was carrying a leather briefcase, clutching it to her chest as if it contained something precious. Nora's heart pounded as she watched them enter the Wari house through a side door. She waited a full minute, her breath shallow, her mind racing. She had planned to observe, to gather information, to pass the details to Diana, and let the professionals handle it. But something inside her rebelled against the passivity. She had been passive for 17 years. She had watched from the sidelines while Eleanor and Richa rode, and Camille dismantled her family piece by piece. She was done watching. She slipped out of the car, her boots silent on the gravel, and crept toward the Wari house. The side door was slightly ajar, a sliver of dim light escaping from within. She pressed her back against the cold metal wall and listened. "The shipment is scheduled for next week," Richa Road was saying, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Once it clears RS customs, the funds will be routed through the Cayman accounts. By the time anyone notices, we'll be long gone." Long gone where Camille's voice was sharper, more anxious than her brother's. "We can't just disappear, Richa Road. We have lives. We have reputations. If this falls through..." "It won't fall through." Richa Road cut her off, his tone clipped and dismissive. "I've been planning this for months. Every detail is in place. The only thing that could ruin us now is if Nora gets her hands on those asset documents before we can move the money." Nora felt a cold fury settle in her chest. They weren't just protecting their inheritance. They were orchestrating an escape. A flight from justice, financed by stolen millions. And they were doing it while pretending to be the victims of her greed. "About Nora," Camille said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "I've been thinking. She's not going to stop. She has that attorney, and she has the letter from Marga Ret. If she gets wind of the shipment, she could blow the whole operation. Then we make sure she doesn't get wind of it," Richa Road said flatly. "I have a contact, a man who handles difficult situations. He's expensive, but he's effective. If it comes to that, he can make sure Nora and Mia are no longer a problem." Nora's blood turned to ice. She pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. They were talking about killing her. Killing Mia. The people who had been her family for 17 years were discussing her murder as casually as they might discuss a business merger. She backed away from the door, her legs shaking, her mind a hurricane of fear and rage. She needed to leave. She needed to call Diana, to call the police, to do something. But as she turned to flee, her foot caught on a loose piece of rubble, and she stumbled, her shoulder slamming against the metal door. The sound was deafening in the silence. "Who's there?" Richa RD's voice was Shah RP. Dangerous. Footsteps echoed Tawa RD the door, and Nora didn't think. She ran. Her legs ride her across the gravel lot, her lungs burning, her heart pounding so loudly she could rely the shouts behind her. She reached her car, fumbled with the keys, and threw herself into the driver's seat. The engine ROA read to life as she slammed her foot on the gas, tires screeching against the pavement. In the REA view mirror, she saw Richa Road burst out of the Wari house, his face twisted with fury. He was shouting something, but she couldn't hear him over the ROA of the engine and the thunder of her own pulse. She drove without looking back, her hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles were white, until the Wari house was nothing but a speck in the distance. She didn't stop driving until she reached Diana's office. The lights were still on, a beacon in the darkness. She stumbled through the door, her breath ragged, her clothes streaked with dust and sweat. Diana looked up from her desk, her expression shifting from surprise to Allah RM. "Nora, what happened? You look. They're going to kill us," Nora gasped, collapsing into the NEA rest chair. "Richa Road and Camille. They're laundering money. They're planning to flee the country. And they hired someone to make us disappear." Diana's face went pale, but her voice remained steady. "Tell me everything. From the beginning. Don't leave anything out." Nora poured out the story in fragments. The burner phone, the Wari house, the conversation she had over Hiei Road. She told Diana about the shipment, the Cayman accounts, the contact Richa Road had mentioned. She told her about the threat, the casual way Richa Road had discussed a murder, as if she were nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. When she finished, Diana was silent for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and dialed a number. "This is Diana Reyes. I need to report a credible threat to life. And I need to file an emergency motion for a protective order."
"Yes. Now."
Nora sat in the chair, her body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. She had been so focused on winning the legal battle, on reclaiming what was rightfully hers, that she had forgotten the most basic truth. Predators don't play by the rules. When they're cornered, they fight. And Richa Road and Camille were cornered. "I'm sorry," Diana said, hanging up the phone. "I should have anticipated this. I should have warned you to be more careful." Anticipated? Nora laughed bitterly. "How could you have anticipated that my husband would hire a hitman?" Diana's expression softened with something close to pity. "Because men like Richa Road don't give up power easily. When they feel their control slipping, they lash out. I've seen it 100 times. The only difference is that most of my clients don't survive long enough to tell the tale." Nora closed her eyes, her mind spinning. She thought about Mia, safe in Mrs. Albright's house, an idea of how close she had come to losing her mother. She thought about her grandmother, Marga Rhett, who had tried to stop Eleanor's schemes and failed. She thought about her own mother, who had lived her entire life in the shadow of Eleanor's cruelty, too broken to fight back. "I'm not going to let them win," Nora said, opening her eyes. "I've spent 17 years being afraid of them, running from them, keeping my head down so I wouldn't be a target.
And it didn't work.
They still came after me. They still tried to take everything. So I'm done running." Diana studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. "What are you proposing?" "I'm going to meet Richa Road," Nora said. "Tomorrow. In public. I'm going to tell him I know everything. And I'm going to give him a choice. He can walk away from the inheritance, sign over everything to Mia, and disappear from our lives forever. Or I'll go to the press with the money laundering, the offshore accounts, and the hitman. I'll make sure everyone knows what he and Camille have done. I'll make sure they never have a moment's peace. That's dangerous, Diana said slowly. If he's desperate enough to hire someone to kill you, he's not going to respond well to threats. I know. Nora's voice was calm, resolute. But I have leverage now. I have a USB drive Gregory gave me. I have the letter from MA/RGA Ret. I have the evidence of the money laundering. And I have the recording from tonight. I turned on my phone's voice recorder the moment I got to the Wari house. I have his voice, Diana. His own voice, admitting everything. Diana's eyes widened. You recorded him. I wasn't just running, Nora said, a grim smile tugging at her lips. I was running with proof. Richa Road thinks he has all the power. He thinks he can threaten me and walk away. But he's wrong. He's been wrong about me from the very beginning. Diana leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. Mrs. Hart, she said, I think you might be the most dangerous client I've ever had. I'm not dangerous, Nora said, her voice hard as steel. I'm just done being a victim. The next morning, Nora stood in the lobby of Richa Ard's office building, her posture straight, her expression serene. She had dressed in her finest suit, a deep burgundy that made her look powerful and unapproachable. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup minimal but precise. She looked like a woman who had come to collect a debt. Richa Road emerged from the elevator, his face pale and drawn. He had clearly not slept. His eyes root around the lobby, sea urching for threats, before landing on Nora. What are you doing here? His voice was a low hiss, rely controlled. I came to give you a choice, Nora said, her voice calm and clear. I know about the money laundering. I know about the Cayman accounts. I know about the shipment. And I know about the man you hired to make Mia and me disappear. Richa Ard's face went white, then red. You're insane. You're making this up. I have no idea what you're talking about. Really? Nora pulled out her phone and pressed play. Richa Ard's voice filled the lobby, clear and unmistakable. Asterisk, if it comes to that, he can make sure Nora and Mia are no longer a problem. Asterisk. Richa Ard lunged for the phone, but Nora was faster. She stepped back, holding it out of reach. Touch me, and I'll send this to every news outlet in the city. I'll post it on social media. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are. Richa Ard froze, his face contorted with rage. What do you want? I want you to sign over everything, Nora said. The trust, the properties, the offshore accounts, everything. You'll walk away with nothing, and you'll never contact Mia again. If you do, I'll ruin you. Richa Road read at her, his chest heaving. For a moment, she thought he might attack her. Then something shifted in his eyes. Something that looked almost like fear. Fine, he spat. I'll have my attorney draw up the papers. But this isn't over, Nora. You think you've won, but you haven't. You'll never be free of me. I already am, Nora said, turning to walk away. Goodbye, Richa Road. She walked out of the building into the cold morning air, her heart pounding with exhilaration. The battle was far from over. She still had to deal with Camille, and there were legal hurdles to clear, and she had no idea what Richa Road might do in his desperation. But for the first time in 17 years, she was the one in control. She pulled out her phone and texted Mia. Asterisk, it's done. I'm coming home. Asterisk, and then she allowed herself to smile. Chapter 5. The weight of ashes. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, the kind of persistent drizzle that soaked through wool and seeped into bones. Nora stood at the bottom of the granite staircase, her hand wrapped around Mia's, watching the sleek black cars pull into the circular driveway one by one. Richa Ard's attorney arrived first, a portly man with a comb-over and a permanent scowl. Then Camille, her silver-blonde hair plastered to her scalp, her eyes rooting nervously as she clutched her designer handbag like a shield. Richa Road was the last to arrive, emerging from a town car with his shoulders hunched and his jaw tight, a man who had been stripped of his armor and didn't know how to stand without it. Nora felt a strange detachment as she watched them ascend the steps. These were the people who had terrorized her for nearly 2 decades, the architects of her misery, the thieves who had tried to erase her daughter's future. They looked diminished now, smaller somehow, like actors who had forgotten their lines. The power they had wielded over her was an illusion, she realized. A fully constructed mirage that had crumbled the moment she had stopped believing in it. Mia squeezed her hand. "Mom, are you okay?" Nora turned to look at her daughter. Mia was 17, poised and fierce, with her mother's dark eyes and a stubborn set to her jaw that reminded Nora of Margaret. The girl had grown up too fast, had been forced to confront ugliness that no child should have to see. But she had emerged from the fire stronger, sharper, more resilient than anyone had a right to be. "I'm perfect," Nora said, and meant it. They climbed the steps together, their footsteps echoing in the damp morning air. The courtroom was already packed when they entered. Reporters, legal aides, a smattering of distant Vance relatives who had come to watch the spectacle. Nora spotted Gregory in the back row, his face lined with exhaustion, and he gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. She didn't return the gesture. She didn't trust him yet, and she wasn't sure she ever would. But she understood that he had tried, in his own cowardly way, to do the right thing in the end. Diana Reyes was waiting for them at the plaintiff's table, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in its signature severe bun. She looked like a general preparing for battle, her files stacked neatly, her glasses perched on her nose like a weapon. As Nora and Mia took their seats, Diana leaned over and murmured, "Richa Ardy's team is trying to delay. They're filing a motion to have the assets declare red joint marital property. It's a desperate move, but we're prepared for it." Nora nodded, her eyes fixed on the judge's bench. The Honorable Patricia Langley was a woman in her 60s, with a face like red stone and a reputation for being unswayed by wealth or status. She had been appointed to the bench by a governor who believed in justice over privilege, and she had spent her career proving that she was not a woman to be manipulated. The hearing began with a flurry of legal jargon, the kind of dense, impenetrable language that made Nora's head spin. Richa Ardy's attorney argued that the Rowell assets had been commingled with a Vance trust through decades of Shaw-Red financial management, making it impossible to separate the two. Camille's attorney, a Shaw-RP-faced woman with a voice like acid, accused Nora of orchestrating a campaign of character assassination designed to extort her in-laws. Diana countered each argument with cold precision, laying out the forged documents, the fraudulent transfers, the pattern of deception that had spanned half a century. She presented the letter from Margaret, reading it aloud in a voice that ride to every corner of the room. She introduced the forensic accountants who had traced the stolen assets, the handwriting experts who had confirmed Eleanor's forgeries, the financial analysts who had uncovered the offshore accounts. And then she played the recording to Richa Ardy's voice filled the courtroom, clear and damning. Asterisk, if it comes to that, he can make sure Nora and Mia are no longer a problem. Asterisk, the silence that followed was absolute. Richa Ardy's face went ashen, his hands gripping the table so tightly his knuckles went white. Camille let out a small, strangled sound, her fully constructed composure finally cracking. Even Judge Langley, who had seen her shari of ugly family disputes, looked disturbed. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, her voice like ice, "do you have any response to this evidence?" Richa Ardy's attorney scrambled to his feet, stammering something about the recording being taken out of context, a private conversation that had been misinterpreted, a moment of frustration that didn't reflect his client's true character. But the damage was done. The room had heard the threat, the casual dismissal of his wife and daughter's lives, and there was no unhearing it. Judge Langley listened to the arguments for another 45 minutes, her face unreadable. When the attorneys had finally exhausted themselves, she leaned back in her chair and surveyed the room with a gaze that made Nora's skin prickle. "I've heard enough," the judge said. "This is not a complicated case. It is, in fact, remarkably simple. Eleanor Vance engaged in a sustained pattern of fraud, theft, and manipulation that spans 5 decades. She stole assets that were never legally hers and concealed those thefts through forgery and coercion. Her children, Richa Rode and Camille Vance, were not merely beneficiaries of this fraud, they were active participants in it. They attempted to conceal the theft, to intimidate the rightful heirs, and to threaten their lives when confronted. She paused, her eyes scanning the room. The assets in question hereby frozen. They will be transferred to the rightful heirs, Nora Hart and her daughter, Mia Hart, pending a full accounting by court-appointed auditors. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent restraining order against Richa Rode and Camille Vance, prohibiting them from contacting the HARTS or making any claim on the Rowell estate. And I am referring the evidence of conspiracy to commit murder to the district attorney's office for review. Richa Rode shot to his feet, his face purple with fury. This is outrageous. You can't just... Sit down, Mr. Vance, the judge said, her voice cutting through his protest like a blade. Or I will hold you in contempt. You have made your position abundantly clear. Now sit down and accept the consequences of your actions. Richa Rd collapsed back into his chair, his body trembling with rage. Camille was crying now. Ugly, masque-streaked TRS that she couldn't seem to stop. The cousins and distant relatives in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with the woman who had once been the family's golden girl. Nora sat perfectly still, her hand gripping Mia's under the table. She had imagined this moment for years, the reckoning, the collapse of Eleanor's empire, the look on Richa Rd's face when he realized he had lost. But the reality was different from the fantasy. There was no triumphant surge of joy, no vindictive thrill. There was just a quiet, profound relief, like the lifting of a weight she had carried for so long she had forgotten she was carrying it. The courtroom emptied slowly. Richa Rode and Camille were escorted out by bailiffs, their heads bowed, their faces etched with defeat. Gregory slipped out through a side door, his eyes downcast. The reporters SWA remed, but Diana had arranged for a private exit, and Nora and Mia were led through a back hallway to a waiting car. They drove in silence through the rain-slicked streets, the city blurring past in shades of gray and gold. Nora's hands were steady on the steering wheel, her breathing even. Beside her, Mia read out the window, her expression distant, contemplative. Mom, Mia said finally. What happens now? Nora considered the question. She thought about the beach house she had never seen, the one that belonged to Margaret before Eleanor had stolen it. She thought about the trust fund that would secure Mia's future, the education she would never have to worry about, the freedom she had been denied for so long. She thought about the years of therapy and healing that lay ahead, the slow, painstaking process of rebuilding a life that had been systematically dismantled. Now we live, Nora said. We take back what was stolen, and we build something new. Something that isn't tainted by Eleanor's legacy. Mia nodded slowly. I think I want to go to the beach house. The one Grandma Margaret left us. I want to see the ocean. Nora smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. I think that's a wonderful idea. We'll go this weekend. Just the two of us. They pulled into the driveway of their modest house, the one Nora had bought with her own savings, the one Richa Rode had mocked as beneath him. It was still shabby, still drafty, still a far cry from the Vance estate. But it was theirs. And that made it beautiful. As Nora unlocked the front door, she caught sight of something on the stoop, a small, weathered wooden box, tied with a faded ribbon. She bent down and picked it up, her heart skipping. The box was familiar. It was the same one she had found in her mother's belongings years ago, the one that had held Margaret's letter. But this was not the same box. This one was older, its wood darker, its hinges rusted with age. She untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside was a single photograph, Margaret Vance, young and radiant, standing on a windswept beach with a little girl in her arms. On the back, in Margaret's elegant script, were the words, **, to my dearest granddaughter, who will inherit the sea. **. Nora Sta read at the photograph, her eyes burning with unshed TRS. She had been so focused on the money, on the legal battle, on the fight for justice that she had almost forgotten what this was really about. It wasn't about the millions, the properties, the offshore accounts. It was about legacy. About the love that Margaret had tried so desperately to preserve. The love that Eleanor had tried so hard to extinguish. Mom, Mia's voice was soft, tentative. What is it? Nora turned and handed her daughter the photograph. It's your great-grandmother, she said. And it's a promise. A promise that we're going to be okay. That we're going to take what she gave us and make something beautiful out of it. Mia studied the photograph, her fingers tracing the edges of the faded paper. She looks happy, she said. She looks like she loved that little girl very much.
She did, Nora said.
And I love you very much. More than you will ever know. They stood in the doorway of their home, the rain still falling softly around them, the photograph clasped between their hands like a talisman. Nora thought about Eleanor, lying in her grave with her secrets and her lies. She thought about Richard Road, stripped of his power and his wealth, facing the consequences of his cruelty. She thought about Camille, broken and weeping, her fully constructed world reduced to rubble. And she felt nothing. No pity, no triumph, no lingering bitterness. Just the quiet peace of a woman who had finally, after 17 years, found her way home. Come on, she said, pulling Mia inside. Let's make some tea. And then we can planning our trip to the beach. Mia smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and made her look younger, lighter.
I'd like that, she said.
I'd like that a lot. Nora hung her coat on the hook by the door and walked into the kitchen. The kettle was still on the stove, the same chipped kettle she had used for yours, the one that had seen 1,000 cups of coffee and 1,000 sleepless nights. She filled it with water, set it on the burner, and lit the flame. Outside, the rain began to ease, thin shafts of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Nora watched the light dance across the counter, illuminating the dust motes that floated in the air. She thought about Margaret, standing on a beach with a child in her arms. She thought about Mia, inheriting not just money but freedom. She thought about herself, finally learning to stand tall. The kettle began to whistle, a sharp, insistent sound that pulled her back to the present. She poured the water into 2 mugs, added tea bags, and ride them to the living room, where Mia was already curled up on the couch, the photograph still clutched in her hand. Here, Nora said, handing her a mug. To new beginnings. Mia took the mug, her eyes bright with the promise of a future that was finally, truly hers. To new beginnings, she echoed, and in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the tea and the love of her daughter, and the ghost of a grandmother who had never stopped fighting for her, Nora felt something she had never thought she would feel again. Peace. It was not the end of her story. There would be more challenges, more battles, more heartaches. But she faced them now with a heart that was full and a spine that was steel. She had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, and she knew, with a certainty that was as solid as the earth beneath her feet, that she would never be afraid again. The ashes of Eleanor's empire were scattered to the wind, and in their place, something new was beginning to grow. Something beautiful, something unbreakable, something that was all her own.